For the better part of a century, the Soviets ruled the people of the Caucasus with an iron fist. Ancient blood feuds were suppressed. The Soviets believed in divide and conquer. Nations were checkerboarded within each other. Nagorno, or Mountainous Karabakh, an ancient enclave of Christian Armenians, was placed within Azerbaijan, a Muslim state. A formidable region known for its natural beauty, it was a terrain as stubborn as its offspring. As the Soviet Union fractured, small republics scrambled for freedom. Mountainous Karabakh declared itself independent of Azerbaijan. In response, Azeri mobs, fed by agitators, attacked the Armenians living within their cities. Soon after, a devastating earthquake hit Armenia itself. By now, Armenians had lost patience for Soviet control. What began as partisan skirmishes soon erupted into full-scale war. Azerbaijan had oil, and in the beginning, Russian support. It boosted its military with foreign mercenaries. Karabakh lost much of its territory by 1992. The capital, STEPANAGERD, was bombed mercilessly. By 1993, the Russians stopped supporting Azerbaijan, who was shifting away from their sphere of influence. Undaunted, Azerbaijan launched a final offensive. The farmers they had once faced, however, were now a hardened militia. The offensive was met with stiff resistance, and the tables were finally turned. After months of fighting, Azerbaijan lost control of the situation. Armenian forces pushed into Azerbaijan itself in a gambit to secure a buffer zone. Tens of thousands on both sides were dead, and over 1 million more were refugees. The situation to the north, however, was the most difficult. Armenian partisans faced off against a superior Azeri force that still occupied their village of Kupelian. Here, in these dark forests in the mountains, was their theater of perpetual war.
The village of Maghavuz was headquarters to the units stationed along the Gulistan front. It also served as an artillery support to the Armenian forces further south. The slightest rain would turn its unpaved roads into streams of mud. The battle at nearby Mir Bashir was endemic of the shifting fortunes of war. The Armenians of Karabagh were now taking the conflict into Azerbaijan in a gambit to secure defensive positions surrounded by a buffer zone.
In February of 1988, there were some selected pogroms or massacres against Armenians that were living in Sumgait. there were additional pogroms against Armenians in Baku, the capital city of Azerbaijan. Out of this population of maybe about 400,000 Armenians who for a long time had been residing in Azerbaijan, about 350,000 fled.
Armenia got involved in this conflict because it wanted to prevent the genocidal deportation and destruction of the Armenians of Nagorno Karabakh. That was a danger they saw, and Armenia simply couldn't sit by with folded hands and allow that to happen.
The thrust into Mir Bashir was producing heavy casualties on the Armenian side. Hospitals in this region were already stretched to the limit. The wounded would have to be flown back to STEPANAGERD, Karabagh's capital, where they could receive the best care. Incoming supplies would be stored at headquarters and distributed to the units that needed them the most. Medicine was always scarce. Emergency operations would often be performed without anesthetic. Maghabuz in 94 was a village of empty houses. Just a year before, in 1993, it had been contested ground between Azeri and Armenian forces. Among the fighters on the Armenian side were the White Bears, a group of fighters organized and equipped by Garo Kakedjian, a volunteer from the United States. Kakedjian was the grandson of genocide survivors. His unit drew volunteers from all over, taking on the most difficult missions. Garo had fallen here, on one of the hilltops overlooking Maghabuz. The depiction of the coming skirmish left out one detail: the mercenary snipers that would be tracking his final movements.
Part of the reason that the Russians supplied armaments, but also then troops for maintaining borders, was because they had a self-interest in utilizing Armenians as a buffer nation.
Well, Russia, of course, does want peace in the region, but on its own terms. Russia wants a peace that serves Russian national interests. Oil of the Caspian needs to be exported some way. It can't be flown out. It's got to be pumped out through pipelines. And here the U.S. Would like to see a peace which would result in Azerbaijani oil being pumped out to the west through Turkey to a port called Ceyhan, which is on the Mediterranean Sea. The best way to pump out that oil would be through Armenia. Russia, of course, would prefer to see the pipeline go through Russia, through the area of Chechnya, so that Russia would then be able to get the transit revenues and also to promote its dominance, to maintain its dominance in the region, because the country through which the oil flows would have the option of turning off the spigot. The ability to turn off the spigot gives you enormous power.
Գնանք մեր տղաների մոտ, դիրքերը մենք, աչագիների մոտ։ Ուր են? Աչագիները հիմա յոկ թափայում են, որ կոչվում է կանաչ սար, Գյուլիստանի վերևն է։ Նա այստեղից 15 կիլոմետր բարձրանալու ենք սարերը։ Այ, կողմի սարերը։
Gulistan sits in the valley below Marav, the tallest peak of Nagorno Karabakh. In 1994, the Armenian side had three main camps directly opposing Gulistan. The closest one in was Yerager, followed by Gyoktapa. Further to the west, surrounded by high ridges, was the field hospital nestled against a peak called Ardatap. Ardatap would be supplied by helicopter when possible. But when bad weather persisted, supplies would have to be driven up to Yerager by armored personnel carriers and distributed down the line. Reconnaissance was routinely carried out on horseback. The perimeter between the two forces was marked by numerous lookout points and separated by fields of landmines. Most of the fighters on the Gulistan front were volunteers, a number of them driven out from their homes by Azerbaijan special forces before the war began. The rest were conscripts who were just serving out their time and filling the uniforms. In total, all three outposts along this range of mountains could not have added up to more than 300 men and women. Although outnumbered and outgunned, their one advantage was their position. The Armenian side held the high ground, and the slopes leading up were a confusion of landmines. On June 25th, an Azeri offensive up these steep ridges had been repelled.
Բայց տեխնիկայի դեմ մենակ ավտոմատով չես կարա դուրս գաս։ Տանգին ինչ պիտի անես ավտոմատով։ Տեղափոխվանք այնտեղ մոտ մի ամիս առաջ նորից գարունը որ բացվավ, հետ գրավեց այս տերիտորիան։
Although Azeri command had moved heavy armor, including rocket launchers, into positions on the opposing mountains, the fighters of Karabagh were dug into the sides of the hills, making a direct rocket attack almost useless. The fighters of Shahumyan were known by the code name Yernig, the Armenian word for deer. Their commander at Gyoktapa, Shura, had his hands full trying to keep his team supplied and healthy. He faced a daunting task, and morale among the men was getting lower.
Օրինակ ասել 7-8 հոգի զոհված է, ամենը բարակ տեղ գրիվի մեջ է, առանց գրիվը լալու, ռումպ նետելով, ռումպի գդորներեն 7 հոգի զոհված է։
Azerbaijan was at the time utilizing foreign trainers for their troops. There had been reports of Russian mercenaries attacking villages in the early days of the war. The latest round of mercenaries came from Afghanistan. Many in the former Soviet army were out of jobs when the USSR collapsed. These drifted to any war that was willing to pay. A mercenary pilot in the Azeri Air Force could make $5,000 a month, along with bonuses and spending money. This was discovered as more and more mercenaries were shot down during bombing raids over Armenian territory. Russian generals, for their part, sold arms to both sides.
So consequently, there's a big game going on, and sometimes people call this the new great game. There used to be a great game in the 19th century between Britain and Russia.